It's a setback for Beijing. And India cracking down on deepfakes. The government has put big tech on notice. We'll get you all these stories and more. The headlines first. Russia says it has destroyed 16 Ukrainian drones. Moscow shot down the drones over Crimea and in the south of the country. In recent months, Ukraine has ramped up attacks on Russian military installations. Crimea, annexed by Moscow in 2014, is a key supply route for Russian forces in Ukraine. Foreign ministers of China, Japan and South Korea to meet on Sunday for the first time in 4 years. It comes amid tension between Beijing and Washington and Seoul and Pyongyang. The meeting in Busan will set the stage for a three-nation summit to be held next year. Somalia joins the East Africa Trade Bloc, becoming its 8th member. The East African Community was founded in the year 2000. It aims to boost trade by removing customs duties between member states. Vietnam arrests the head of a major soft drinks company. The Vietnamese tycoon will be prosecuted along with his two daughters. They're accused of embezzling over $30 million. This is the latest in a wave of arrests targeting top business leaders in the country. Former Paralympic champion Oscar Pistorius is granted parole. This comes a decade after he fatally shot his girlfriend. In 2017, Pistorius, known as the Blade Runner, was given a 13-year jail sentence. The South African will be released on parole on the 5th of January. And welcome to love in the age of relationship surveillance. Dating apps in China introduce location tracking features for couples. Other features include daily check-ins and allowing significant others to monitor phone usage. Observers say these features will fuel relationship tension. We begin with the outbreak in China. It's too big to ignore. They're clocking more than 10,000 cases a day. Most of the patients are children. They're coming down with a mysterious pneumonia. They have infected lungs and fever, but the cause of the illness is still unclear. You don't know exactly what this disease is, and China won't say how many cases there are or how widespread the outbreak is. Unofficially, it's being called a walking pneumonia. Officially, China is not sure what it's dealing with. But here's what we've been able to piece together. It's massive, with thousands of patients, mostly children. There is anecdotal evidence from key hotspots like China's capital, Beijing. The Beijing Children's Hospital is overwhelmed. They're getting 7,000 patients a day. That's the daily average, 7,000 patients. Another hotspot is Tianjin. It's a metropolis in northern China, close to Beijing. Last Saturday, Tianjin reported a big surge, over 13,000 cases in 24 hours. And this is just from one hospital, the Tianjin Children's Hospital, the biggest one in the city, this hospital. And remember what the pandemic taught us. These numbers are only a conservative estimate. They do not reflect the full scale of the crisis. If 13,000 patients end up in hospital, there are most likely many more outside, many more carrying the infection. That's the first point to note. The second is this. The outbreak is not recent. It must have begun weeks ago for the numbers to swell like this. And it appears that thousands of patients in multiple cities are now infected in China. Let me show you some pictures that are doing the rounds. Again, these are Chinese hospitals. They are overburdened. Look at this one. Reports say these are parents standing in long queues, waiting to get their children treated. There is also a grab of a hospital screen. It says there are more than 700 patients in the queue, 700 patients in the queue. And what's the waiting time to see a doctor? More than 13 hours. Then we have this picture, again from a hospital in China. These children are sick. They have been placed on an IV drip, but they're still doing their schoolwork. This looks like a classroom inside a hospital. All of it is quite alarming. But guess what Beijing says? It's not unusual. They released a statement to this effect today. It said that they've not found anything unusual. They found no novel pathogens, meaning no new virus or bacteria. China is basically saying this is not a new disease. And this is what they've told the WHO, the World Health Organization. But what is causing the surge then? Why are so many children falling sick in China? According to Chinese reports, they're dealing with a perfect storm, a nasty flu season, where multiple diseases are circulating like influenza and Mycoplasma pneumoniae. It is a bacterial infection. So this is China's assurance. But remember, the same China had misled the world in 2019. In a similar fashion, it had played down the Wuhan virus outbreak. When the virus was spreading rapidly, China insisted there was no human-to-human transmission. They lied to the world, and the WHO took their word for it. It was a mistake that cost the world millions of lives. This time, China has shared some data with the WHO, but some experts say it's not good enough. Like Dr. Krutika Kupalli. She's an infectious diseases expert and a member of the WHO's health emergency team. Let me quote from what she said. I was very concerned when the first reports of the alert came across at the end of 2019, and I am concerned now. This is China's first winter without a stringent lockdown, and they could have an increase in respiratory infections as other countries did coming out of lockdown. This could be anything. Let's get more information. And those last 4 words are key. Let's get more information. Experts are raising red flags here, and world leaders cannot take this lightly. We need to be vigilant. India too is watching the situation in China. New Delhi put out a statement today. It said India faces a low risk from the outbreak in China. Nonetheless, it is being monitored. We say it's best to err on the side of caution and not be too diplomatic about this one. Because the last time something like this happened, the world was thrust into a pandemic. We cannot afford to repeat the same mistakes. Pakistan wants to join the BRICS. There's been speculation for a while now, but on Thursday, their foreign ministry confirmed it. The application has been filed. It is now up to BRICS members. If they agree, Pakistan can join the group. But even if one member disagrees, they can't. So let me ask the obvious question. Will India agree? There are groups where both countries are members, like the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but that was different really. India and Pakistan joined the SCO in the same year, in 2017. Neither side had to approve the other. But in BRICS, Pakistan needs India's approval. Let me explain why. You see, BRICS expansion has been a controversial issue. China and Russia have been pushing for it, but India is not keen. The reason is quite simple. For India, BRICS is about multipolarity, about giving voice to the global south. But not for Russia and China. For them, BRICS is an anti-America club. So New Delhi tried to meet them halfway. At this year's BRICS summit, 6 new members were formally invited to join: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and Argentina. 6 countries. And these are countries that India can work with. So New Delhi agreed to give them membership. Could Pakistan be next? Not if India opposes it. All BRICS decisions are taken unanimously, meaning every member has a veto. So India can block Pakistan's membership. In fact, Islamabad has accused India of doing something similar. In 2022, China hosted the BRICS summit. On the sidelines, they invited a number of developing countries, sort of like a BRICS plus dialogue. But Pakistan did not get the invite. Their foreign office lashed out at this decision. They said one member was blocking their participation. They did not say who, but I guess they did not have to. It was India that blocked Pakistan's participation. So why is Islamabad trying again? Reports say they're hoping for Russian support this time. Moscow is chairing the BRICS summit in 2024. It is chairing BRICS rather in 2024. So they will play a key role in deciding possible member candidates. Plus, only Russia can make India rethink. South Africa and Brazil are not close enough to New Delhi. China is, of course, out of the question. So that leaves us with Moscow. They could use their close ties to try and change India's mind. But frankly, it's a long shot, a real mission impossible. But let's put the India-Pakistan equation aside for a moment. Let's look at it objectively. Is Pakistan a good candidate for BRICS? They're living on bailouts from the International Monetary Fund. Their inflation is over 31%. Their democracy exists only on paper. So what exactly does Pakistan bring to the table? Right now, nothing. I'm not saying every BRICS member is perfect, but that future members have to be perfect. I'm saying you shouldn't weigh down the group. Pakistan is a known sponsor of terrorism. Their politics is unstable, their military leadership is coup-hungry, and their national debt is way too high. If they join, they will be the weakest link in the chain, or in this case, the weakest brick on the wall. Of course, Islamabad will be thinking the opposite. For them, BRICS is an opportunity. We're talking about a powerful group here. Around 41% of the global population, 24% of the global GDP, and 16% of global trade. That is what BRICS brings to the table. And Pakistan would love to be part of it. It opens up more opportunities for them, whether it's trade, investments, or political support. Hence, the request to join. China, too, would love to have Pakistan in BRICS. Imagine having 2 seats at the same table. But that's all the more reason for India to be wary. We haven't heard any response from New Delhi, but a decision will have to be made. The next BRICS summit is in October 2024. Russia will be looking to finalize the candidate list in advance. Unlike the United Nations, there is no abstention here. It's either yes or no. Staying with India's neighborhood, there are massive protests in Nepal. We're talking tens of thousands of people. They marched through the capital, Kathmandu, clashed with riot cops, and braved tear gas and water cannons. Take a look at this. Scenes like that mean only one thing: a lot of passion. It's usually for things like democracy or human rights, but not in Nepal. These protests are for restoring Nepal's monarchy. You heard that right. These are pro-monarchy protesters. They're chanting the name of Nepal's last king, King Gyanendra. And leading them was this man, Durga Kumar Prasai. He's a known figure and a key figure in the story. Prasai is a businessman based in eastern Nepal. He was once close to Nepal's top communist leaders like current Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal and former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. But now he's turned anti-establishment. His pitch is all about 2 things. 1, restoring democracy and making Nepal a Hindu state. And 2, cutting interest rates. Now I know these 2 things are not related, but somehow that's what Prasai is passionate about. The question is, can he challenge the status quo? Well, pro-monarchy protests are not new in Nepal. They keep happening from time to time. But this time, 2 things are different. 1 is the size of the protest. It's way bigger. And 2, the government response. They banned rallies in parts of Kathmandu. Plus, the ruling party held its own rally in the city, sort of like a counter-protest. Many reports say the government is spooked, that it is overreacting to Prasai's challenge. Even the recent TikTok ban could be related. Let me explain how. Earlier this week, Nepal's government banned TikTok. They said it was disrupting social harmony, which is a fair point. TikTok is notorious for doing that. Also for spying on behalf of China. That's TikTok for you. But Nepalese say that wasn't the real reason for the ban. They say the ban was to crush dissent. Now, we won't speculate on the government's decision, but we will say this. Nepal's politicians are not a popular bunch. The king stepped down in 2006 after protests. In 2008, the monarchy was abolished, and since then, Nepal has been a secular republic. Just one problem, though. There is no stability. The country has had 11 governments in 15 years. 6 prime ministers have served less than 1 year in office. Of course, such instability has consequences. Nepal's average inflation was 7.7% this year. Unemployment is 19% in the 15 to 29 age group. Last year, around 750,000 young people left the country. 750,000. That's around 2,000 people per day. Most of them now work abroad. And you can't really call it migration. It's more of an exodus. My point is, there is anger against the politicians of Nepal. The likes of Durga Kumar Prasai are tapping into this anger. But their solution? I'm afraid it's even worse. Nepal's kings ruled for centuries, and like most kings, they claim divine origins. But that mystique and awe disappeared in the year 2001. That's when Nepal's crown prince went on a killing spree. He shot dead 9 members of the ruling family. Even the king and the queen were not spared. And that episode really shook the Nepalese. Like I said, the mystique was gone. Still, the monarchy could have survived if not for the new King Gyanendra. In 2005, he fired the Nepalese government. He took absolute control of the country. That was the last nail in the coffin, really. Thousands of people protested against the monarchy. Eventually, Gyanendra had to step down. He's still alive, though. He lives as a private citizen in Nepal. No pomp, no support, no royal palace. It's unlikely that protests will reverse it. Having said that, it's a message to the country's politicians. If people want monarchy over democracy, it can only mean two things. Either the politicians are really bad, or young people need to read more history. In Nepal, it's a mix of both. Either way, the royalists could make the next elections interesting. It's supposed to be held in 2027, so it's still pretty far off. But in Nepal's volatile landscape, who knows? It could be next year. Now let's talk about the situation in Gaza. The hostilities have ceased for now. After 7 weeks of bombardment, there's a pause. Yesterday, Qatar finalized a ceasefire deal, and so far it has held. The Hamas is upholding its part of the agreement. Today, they released some of the hostages. In exchange, Israel will release about 150 Palestinian prisoners. But the Israeli forces have also issued a warning. They say this war is not over yet. Our next report tells you more.
It finally happened. After a 24-hour delay, there is a truce in Gaza. Israel and the Hamas have agreed to a 4-day-long pause. After nearly 7 weeks of intense fighting, the ceasefire seems to be holding. In Tel Aviv, Israelis are feeling a sense of relief.
Well, it's an exciting day, very sad day, but also very exciting because we are waiting for the hostages for such a long time. And we hope everybody will be free soon at their homes. We want to support the families as much as we can do.
The moment finally came in the afternoon. The Hamas lived up to its promise and released some Israeli hostages. They were taken during the 7th of October attacks. To secure their release, Israel is turning over Palestinian prisoners. Over the course of the next 3 days, more hostages and prisoners will be exchanged. Qatar is supervising every aspect of this truce. But even they realize that the ceasefire is on shaky ground. Already, Israel has hinted the pause will be short-lived. Before the ceasefire, Israel's defense minister spoke to his troops. He wants to continue the war in Gaza for another 2 months. His goal is to bring back all 240 hostages.
Without the continuation of military pressure, there won't be any chance to bring back the next group of hostages that we want to bring back.
So for Israel, this war is not over yet. But Israel's fight is becoming more complicated. There are fresh tensions on the border with Hezbollah. Yesterday, over 50 rockets flew in from Lebanon. They targeted Israel's military posts in the north. It was a response to Israeli attacks. They have claimed over 100 lives in Lebanon so far, and over 50,000 people are displaced. The locals are living in fear. They don't want a wider conflict that consumes the entire region.
I'm a refugee from Palestine, from Yarmouk, and from Yarmouk I came here to Shatila refugee camp, and now we don't know where we will find refuge. We don't know where to go. We don't know where we are heading. Nobody knows.
However, all signs are pointing towards an escalation. Israel and Hezbollah are clashing more frequently. Hezbollah says the Hamas is an ally, and the airstrikes are supposed to deter Israel. The Hezbollah are backed by Iran, one of the arch-rivals of Israel. This week, Iran's foreign minister travelled to Lebanon. He met with the leader of Hezbollah and discussed the situation in Gaza. The ceasefire has given regional players an opportunity to regroup and reassess. And the coming days could define the trajectory of this conflict.
For our next story, let's talk economics, or should I say, Erdoganomics. The Turkish president is known for a lot of things. One of them is his bizarre economic policies. Let me explain. What do you do when inflation goes up? You hike interest rates, regulate the flow of cash in the system. That's Economics 101. But Erdogan does not agree. He says interest rates are the mother of all evil. So even when inflation went up, he kept interest rates low. And the result was this, a battered economy. In Turkey, inflation is sky high. Their currency, the lira, has collapsed. People are struggling to pay for food. Erdoganomics clearly backfired. So the Turkish leader has had a change of heart. Or he had to change his tune at the very least. That U-turn came this June. Erdogan won a record third term in office. He hired a new economic team. And he is also raising interest rates. In fact, the latest hike is making headlines. Do you know why? Because Ankara has raised interest rates to 40% now, 40. It's the highest level in 20 years. This is Turkey's sixth hike since June. In June, the interest rates were at 8.5%. We are in the month of November right now, and interest rates are at a record 40%. Citizens are struggling. They can't afford meals or rent.
These interest rate hikes won't affect the end result. If they increase by 20 percentage points, forget 5 percentage points. Real inflation isn't what the Turkish Statistical Institute is announcing. Citizens are at a loss.
I see that the central bank is putting up a fight. It's doing everything it can. By increasing interest rates, it's trying to keep foreign currency stable and fighting against inflation. I see it's increasing interest rates in a determined way. Until now, we haven't seen inflation decrease, but I'm hopeful for the future.
The central bank is hopeful too. They admit that the policy is aggressive, but they believe it will work out. What about President Erdogan? He's quite optimistic. He says the economy will soon enter a quote-unquote virtuous cycle of disinflation and a stronger lira. About time it did. Not very long ago, Turkey was one of the better performing economies in the region. When Erdogan took power, in fact, they were doing quite well. In his first term, the economy grew rapidly. Between 2002 and 2021, they saw an annual growth rate of 5.8%. But the real trouble began when the Turkish lira started falling. In 2021, $1 was equal to 8 liras. In 2022, it was down to 19. You see the slide. The lira was weakening. But Erdogan stayed defiant. Soon everything started collapsing like dominoes. Last year, inflation hit a record 85.5%. That was the inflation level in Turkey, 85.5%. Plus, there were structural problems. The country's initial economic growth was not stable to begin with, and it could no longer be sustained. So it collapsed. And Erdogan made it worse. His policies were unorthodox and sometimes downright illogical. But no one could challenge him. Those who did lost their jobs. Those who did not had to toe his line. Looks like his recent election win has forced a rethink. Erdogan no longer has polls to worry about, at least not for the next 4 years. He does not have to appease the public for some time, so he can afford some radical action. That should explain the rising interest rates. Although he insists that his views have not changed, he still believes lower interest rates is the way to go. But that could just be a tactic. If it works out, he can take all the credit. If it does not, he can blame the central bank. Either way, Turkey is in pain, and it may not end anytime soon. Now let's turn our attention to the Republic of Ireland. The country is tense. A knife attack in the capital, Dublin, shook the nation yesterday. 5 people were injured. 3 of them were children. A 5-year-old girl sustained severe injuries. The knife attack led to an outpouring of anger. Hundreds of people took to the streets. They clashed with the Irish police. They set vehicles on fire, smashed storefront windows, and engaged in looting. The rioters have been described as an anti-immigrant mob. But the police did not even reveal too many details about the attacker. Just his gender and approximate age. That did not stop the mob, though. Here's our report.
This was Ireland's capital, Dublin, last night. A mob numbering in the hundreds taking to the streets. Vehicles set ablaze. Protesters with their faces covered, staring down the riot police. Some even clashing with police personnel. It was the worst bout of violence that Dublin has seen in years.
What we saw last night was an extraordinary outbreak of violence, and we have to then respond accordingly in terms of our graduated response to the policing of disorder. But these are scenes that we have not seen in decades.
What set off this wave of unrest? A knife attack. It took place yesterday afternoon. 5 people were injured, including 3 children.
One girl aged 5 years has sustained serious injuries and is currently receiving emergency medical treatment in CHI Temple Street. One boy aged 5 years and a girl aged 6 years who received less serious injuries were brought to CHI Crumlin for treatment. The boy has since been discharged from CHI Crumlin.
This attack on children is what set off the riots. There were 2 others who were injured as well.
The adult female in her 30s is being treated for serious injuries at the Mater Hospital. An adult male in his 50s is also being treated for serious injuries at a hospital in the Dublin region. My understanding is members of the public did intervene at a very, very early stage, and again, we would applaud those members of the public for getting involved in such a traumatic and potentially dangerous situation for themselves.
The hospital staff arrived.
It's my understanding the person of interest was detained at the scene.
The man in the 50s he was talking about is the suspect. Bystanders at the scene of the stabbing intervened. They helped the police capture the suspect. He sustained injuries during the incident. He has been arrested and is undergoing treatment. The police didn't reveal anything else about him, but rumors began to circulate. Rumors about the suspect's nationality, and before long, a mob had appeared. A police chief described the rioters as a complete lunatic faction driven by far-right ideology. They didn't just set vehicles on fire. Rioters were seen smashing windows, looting stores, and making off with merchandise as they covered their faces.
You can say in relation to the attack there in Parnell yesterday afternoon, God help them, has nothing to do with what went on here last night. It's just tuggery, and no protection or whatever else around the city. And it's terrible for any of the staff working in shops that couldn't even get home then last night because they were bombarded into their own shops. They couldn't get out.
Ireland's Justice Minister put out this statement. She said, "A thuggish and manipulative element must not be allowed to use an appalling tragedy to wreak havoc." And Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar expressed his disgust as well.
Those involved brought shame on Dublin, brought shame on Ireland, and brought shame on their families and themselves. These criminals did not do what they did because they love Ireland. They did not do what they did because they wanted to protect Irish people. They did not do it out of any sense of patriotism, however warped. They did so because they're filled with hate. They love violence, they love chaos, and they love causing pain to others.
It will likely take some time for peace to return to the streets of Dublin. But true calm won't return until the attacker faces justice.
Now let's move to Ireland's neighbour, the UK, where a different type of riot is taking place. This is in the British Parliament, the House of Commons. The target is David Cameron, former Prime Minister turned Foreign Secretary. He is facing some tough questions about his ties to Britain's greatest strategic challenge, China. Cameron has been close to China for years. He ushered in what he called a golden age for UK-China relations.
This visit marks the start of a new era. Some have called it a golden era in relations between Britain and China, an era of stronger economic ties, deeper trade links, closer relations between our peoples, and meaningful dialogue on the issues that matter to us both.
That was back in 2015 during Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to the UK. Cameron was Prime Minister back then, and these images may seem absurd now considering today's geopolitical tensions. The British Prime Minister shared a pint with the Chinese President. There was a grand banquet with the late Queen Elizabeth II. And China invested billions in British nuclear power plants. All this was under David Cameron's watch. Now you might think, that was a long time ago. Why should it be relevant today? The global scenario has changed and Cameron will have changed with it. Well, not quite. Even after he left office in 2016, David Cameron continued to cozy up to China. That did not change. Not even after current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak declared that the golden age was over last year. In fact, just 2 months ago, Cameron was seen lobbying for China, for the Chinese-owned Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. A video has emerged. It shows Cameron spouting Chinese talking points. It was uploaded on YouTube by a Sri Lankan news channel. And here's what Cameron said. When you read the press about it, you think the whole thing was owned by China, governed by China, and that the Sri Lankans have made a terrible mistake. He cited a PwC report commissioned by China to talk up this project. At the same time, he downplayed an IMF report that was critical of the port. This is what he said, and I'm quoting again. The IMF, well, there's some skepticism in their report. It does say this would be a good opportunity for businesses to invest in Sri Lanka. David Cameron did all of this in September. He said all of this in September this year. When asked about the lobbying, here's what his team said. It was a paid event, a paid speaking event organized by KPMG Sri Lanka. And that David Cameron had not engaged with China about speaking events since he became the Foreign Secretary. The thing is, he became Foreign Secretary only 2 weeks ago. So when exactly did he cut ties with China? Let me show you some more images. They're from the Colombo Port City Project's Facebook page. One of them shows David Cameron. He's getting a gift from the managing director of the project. It is not a good look. And this is just a drop in the ocean. An arguably bigger issue is this one. Cameron's quoting of China's sovereign wealth fund. It started after he resigned as Prime Minister in 2016. David Cameron got involved in a UK-China investment fund, a $1 billion fund. He was supposed to manage it. Although he had no experience in investment, he was managing a $1 billion fund. Cameron was seen shuffling to China and back on multiple occasions between 2017 and 2018. He was quoting China's sovereign wealth fund, the China Investment Corporation, or CIC. He wanted the CIC to be the anchor investor in his $1 billion fund. He hoped to use the state-owned CIC's name to gather more investors. It's like using the Chinese state to make yourself rich. Definitely not a good look. Cameron's fund eventually failed to take off. He says he has stepped back from his private interests since he took office. So technically, all his past antics may be perfectly legal. But does that absolve David Cameron of the moral implications? Shouldn't there be a cool-off period, a period between cozying up to China and joining the UK government? Cameron will have to answer all of these questions. His first round of questioning as Foreign Secretary is scheduled for the 5th of December, so hopefully we'll find out the answers soon. And staying with China, looks like Beijing has suffered a major setback in Taiwan. The self-ruled island is going to polls. On one side was the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. On the other was an alliance of opposition parties, parties that wanted closer ties with China. Of course, Beijing would have been happy to see them win, but the opposition is now split, and that too quite dramatically on television. One of the opposition parties has pulled out of the race. The other two are running independently. The January election could decide Taiwan's future. And with the opposition divided, relations with China will likely remain strained. Our next report has more.
On Thursday, Taiwan's opposition presidential hopefuls met up. They were sharing a stage. There were 3 of them. Former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-jae, Kuomintang leader Ho Yu-yi, and billionaire businessman Terry Gou. This was their chance to thrash out an agreement to decide on a united opposition ticket. But the negotiations broke down in spectacular fashion. That too on live TV. Soon it was arguments and bickering. This was the final nail in the coffin of a united opposition. Foxconn founder Go has now dropped out of the race. The other 2 are contending, but separately. They're also trailing behind the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. Together, they could have a chance to beat them, but divided, it looks highly unlikely.
Our country and the next generation are facing tensions across the Taiwan Strait. When I ran for office, I wanted to make a change to save Taiwan.
And while the opposition is in disarray, the ruling DPP party is powering on. President Tsai Ing-wen is barred from running. That's because she has served 2 terms in office. Representing her party is Vice President Lai Ching-te. His running mate is Hsiao Bi-khim, Taiwan's former de facto ambassador to the United States.
We are truly grateful for all the support that's been extended to us over the years, especially as we have been put in a situation where the geostrategic challenges are formidable. And a rock-solid partnership with the United States is critically important right now.
Of course, the divided opposition is a setback for China. In 2016, President Tsai Ing-wen was elected for the first time. Beijing reacted sharply. It cut high-level contact with Taiwan. It also stepped up military activities. When she won again in 2020, Beijing kept up the pressure. It conducted large-scale military exercises. Which brings us to the rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait. On Thursday, an Australian warship sailed through the waterway. The ship entered the strait on Thursday. It then sailed in a southerly direction. Australian Navy vessels regularly transit through the Taiwan Strait. But when Beijing was questioned about this, it asked parties to not take provocative actions. A bit rich coming from China.
China's position on relevant issues is consistent and clear. We urge relevant parties not to take provocative actions and not to cause trouble for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Taiwan is going to elections on January 13th. It's an election that will be closely watched both by Washington and Beijing and across the world. For the self-ruled island, the stakes are too high. The results could determine the future of China-Taiwan relations and the future of the island.
Vantage continues after a short break.
Highest report within a week or so.
Okay, can I ask you one last question, sir? One of the things you talked about a little earlier was that the World Health Organization was not as proactive when COVID took place. If we were to assume the organization may act similarly in this case too, sir, what can India do, especially because in some ways we have porous borders in the sense that travel takes place China to India, India to China every day. You have flights going, for example. Is there more at this moment India can do, or would it be too early?
I think we need to start just looking out for early signs. If the infection is still localized in China, the real worry is that no one believes what China says. So the real impact is that especially in international traffic, we then, for any passenger who's been to China or recently, at least in the past 2 weeks, would have to be screened in exit and entry. That puts a huge manpower and financial resource burden on the parent country and the neighboring countries. So I think we need to be very, very careful. India is a very strong representation in WHO, and I would request the Indian government to put adequate pressure on WHO to screen what is happening there, to get the serology and put it in public domain. No one is safe till everyone is safe. And I think China can't play hide and seek like they did last time.
The World Health Organization officially seeking a detailed report from the nation on an increase in respiratory illnesses and cases of pneumonia in children. This move came after media reports that Chinese hospitals have been overwhelmed with sick children in 2 regions in particular, one of which is the capital, Beijing. This is as an outbreak of pneumonia escalates in cities across the country, and this is as the country continues to grapple, remember, with the aftermath of COVID. Still, this is the World Health Organization. They asked Chinese authorities of this. Now, these are the updates we have so far. We'll wait for a reporter to join us to bring us more details. But it is reported also that China has responded to it. We'll share China's response in just a second with you.
Now, here's the thing about rules and technology. The technology is always one step ahead, meaning the rules are playing catch up. And it's the same everywhere. Think back to when the internet became common, or the social media explosion, or the current deepfake trend. The technology came first, now the rules are playing catch-up. But I guess it's better late than never. Let me tell you what the Indian government is doing. Today, the IT Minister of India held talks with social media companies. He gave them a deadline, 7 days to address the problem of deepfakes. The minister says he expects 100% compliance.
So we look forward to working in partnership with these platforms, and we look forward to an era where they will be a lot more responsible and a lot more responsive to the expectations under the law and a lot more compliant. We have made it very clear today that we will be expecting 100% compliance of the law, and we will use our enforcement tools to ensure that the 100% of the law is complied with.
That's a strong warning. The IT Ministry is also making 2 changes. One, a special officer is being appointed to register complaints. Suppose you have spotted a deep fake on the internet. You can complain to that officer. And second, a dedicated website. This will help you file FIRs against entities posting deep fakes, whether it's an individual, a group, or the platforms. So the idea is quite clear. Make it easy to flag deep fakes on social media, and that's not all. More rules and regulations are in the pipeline. The government says a plan will be unveiled in the next 10 days. So New Delhi is on the offensive. It wants to limit the spread of deep fakes. But what about preventing them? Is there any way to automatically filter deep fakes? Well, Sony could be onto something. It's developing an in-camera authenticity technology. I know it sounds complicated, but think of it as a digital signature. Every photo you click will have a signature. If it doesn't, it could be a deepfake. Sony has conducted 2 rounds of tests. They're collaborating with news agency Associated Press. The company is not saying much about the technology, but reports say the leadership is quite hopeful. Their plan is to roll out the feature by 2024. But I'm afraid it's not enough, because pictures are not just clicked on professional cameras. Most people use smartphones now. So the question is, can this feature be replicated easily? Can it be introduced in low-cost phones as well? If not, it will be a limited solution. So more work needs to be done. Deepfakes must be identified and removed before they go viral. That's the challenge for social media. It's the same challenge as hate speech. It's not just about taking them down. It's about taking them down fast. If not, you know how these things work. The good news is that governments are thinking about it. Just last week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked about deepfakes. He said they could cause major disturbances. And India's IT Ministry has now gone one step ahead. They're calling it a new threat to democracy. So the focus is there. It's now about creating the right rules, also taking the right help, because rules alone cannot solve this problem. You need technology as well. Only a combination of the two can tackle deepfakes. Vantage continues after a short break.
More details. Remember, China has been dealing with this, what they've called a mysterious pneumonia outbreak that's spread particularly in Chinese schools, as we've told you, resulting in hospitals being overwhelmed with sick children. Now, my colleague Shireen is with us right now to bring us more details. Shireen, I believe no deaths had been reported so far as of just till yesterday. So multiple cases, but no deaths so far. And I believe Chinese authorities are now telling the World Health Organization that even when they're doing the inquiry, there are no pathogens they don't recognize. Can you tell us, Shireen, A, what is a pathogen, and then tell us more about the Chinese statement, please?
Well, as far as the cases of pneumonia among kids in China is concerned, it started around mid-October. And till now, there has in fact been hundreds of kids who have in fact been affected by pneumonia. Now, remember what the Chinese government in their statement, the medical department in their statement have been saying is that because the restrictions of COVID-19 has been removed, more and more people are going
And now now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Spain, Madrid is welcoming the Christmas season by turning on the lights. In the UK, it was a miracle rescue for a man who was stuck in a burning high-rise. And UN Chief Antonio Guterres is in Antarctica ahead of the COP28 summit. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1859, Charles Darwin published his book on the origin of species. The book talked about the theory of natural selection. It changed the way mankind viewed evolution. The book became one of the most influential books of modern times. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Welcome. You're watching Breaking on CNN News 18 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into the segment with our top focus on the Israel-Hamas war. Now, a deal between Israel and Hamas for a temporary ceasefire or an operational pause, as Israel is calling it, for at least a 4-day pause in hostilities is currently taking place. We're learning that 13 Israeli hostages and 12 Thai nationals were the first batch to be released to the staff of the International Committee for Red Cross and were taken from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza to the Rafah crossing, that is at Egypt, into Israel. The accord was orchestrated by Qatar and the US and officially announced earlier this week. The agreement entails a complete ceasefire with no attacks from the air or the ground and the skies clear of drones to allow for these hostages to be released to happen in a safe environment. Now, the Israel Defense Forces have launched an offensive in Gaza ever since 1,200 citizens from Israel were killed in a Hamas attack on October 7. Hamas had also taken nearly 240 hostages, mostly civilians, when their operatives burst across the border fence and raided towns in southern Gaza. For more details, let's quickly go across to Siddhant Mishra, who's joining me on the phone line. Siddhant, if you could throw more light on how this entire deal is being facilitated and what is the role that's being played by Red Cross?
Well, that's right. And in fact, after 48 days of intense fighting, counteroffensives, the war is witnessing a day is humanitarian pause, and perhaps we are getting this visuals at least from the Hamas camp, where the hostages have been set free and the Red Cross convoy have entered the Rafah crossing, which is the Egyptian territory. And in fact, they are being treated at hospital. The number that have been shared with us, Akanksha, differ from one organization to the other, because Qatar government has to say that there are 13 Israeli nationals, 12 Thai nationals, and 1 Filipino, and Red Cross has to say that in total 24 hostages have been released by Hamas. So let's wait for the official confirmation how many of them have been released and how many of them have successfully entered the Rafah crossing. So none of the American nationals have been released, point number one. Second, we are still awaiting the response from the government of Israel. Once they will take charge of those who have been set free, then we would be in a better situation to confirm the numbers.